Hello, I'm Gene, and I'm here with Jason Beaird, author of Principles of Beautiful Web Design. It's a SitePoint title. Also a user experience designer for MailChimp. So thanks for talking with us about your book today.
Thanks for having me over.
Awesome. Well, I use your book in a class I teach in 101 and 201, and it's a great book for people who aren't necessarily seasoned graphic designers, interface designers. But why did you write the book? I mean, did you really think about that in particular?
No, I mean, I wrote the book for developers, and when the first edition came out, when I was working on the first edition, I was writing it towards web developers who are maybe been building websites for a while, but don't have any kind of design training. And I feel fortunate to have some academic design training, and people that are already building websites, they're not going to go back to school to get design training when they're already building websites. So that was really the target audience for it, was people that already had some technical know-how, but maybe needed some help in the picking colors and picking fonts kind of department.
Right, because it's not really about, I mean, you're not going to get any HTML or CSS.
No, there's hardly any HTML or CSS in the book.
Right, it's like
intentionally.
It's like the core principles of great design.
Mm-hmm.
And, as all of us looking at great websites, we all appreciate that. So how did you get hooked up with SitePoint? How did that work out?
It was pretty random. I mean, back in, I guess it was 2004, 2005, I got contacted by their editor. I was just fairly fresh out of college. I graduated in 2003 and was doing design for a service provider, and also did web design and development. And I was working with some developers, and like I said, I wrote the book towards developers. They were looking for somebody to write a book for developers on how to design. And so they approached me. They said, you have design experience, you do some front-end work, would you be interested in writing a book?
Right.
And they went from there and
just kind of matched up perfectly.
Wrote an article, and then that went really well on the blog, and then they asked me to submit a table of contents.
You're like, whoa.
Okay.
That's great. That's great. So the book is now actually in its second edition.
Right.
Just to be clear about that. You kept the same structure in the book, though. You just basically updated a lot of stuff.
I would say it's probably 60% or so the same book. I mean, you used the first one for your class,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And how much different do you think it is between first and second?
It's still the same structure, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. Why did you structure it like that? Why did you go from the, you cover like the 5 pillars, basically.
Right. I looked at a lot of traditional graphic design books and the web design books that are out there. There really was nothing at the time that was just design principles. I mean, a lot of them were how to build websites, and we didn't want it to be that kind of book. We wanted it to be just design principles.
Right.
So I was looking at, what's the easiest way to digest design, and that's how I came up with the 5 chapters. First, set your layout. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of it was based on my work methodologies at the time. How we went about designing websites at the first company I was working at.
Right.
But layout, and then choose color, and then texture, and typography and imagery, and that became the 5 chapters of the book.
Right. That's really like, any great web design, you boil it down to those basic things, and if you can do those things well.
There's a lot more involved from the the building standpoint and the process standpoint, but as far as the design goes, it could be divided into those categories.
Right. You have a case study in there that is Southern Savers.
That's my favorite part of the book. The new book is the case study. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Right. You know those people, but how did you? I mean, why did you choose them? What makes that case study so special?
Well, I think a lot of the criticism I got for the first edition was the case study, and in my defense, I created the design. The case study, for those who don't have the book, it's basically at the end of each chapter, I sum up the chapter by going through a design step by step through the book.
Right.
And so for the first edition of the book, I kind of created this fictitious case study about my father-in-law's business that was a website that never happened even, and I was designing it as I was writing. And if you've ever written a book before, the deadlines are crazy, and I was designing it in the middle of the night, and it ended up being pretty mediocre, I thought. And the reviews of the book said the same thing. The book's good, but the case study is pretty weak. And
right.
So I knew I wanted the case study to be really strong with this one. And I could have used a project that I'd worked on recently, but I knew the client and the designer on this particular project, and it was in the middle stages. It was still being built when I started working on the
Okay.
second edition. It was like, this is perfect. And so
It's good timing to
I
like, follow
asked,
it.
yeah, I asked Matthew Smith at Square Die and asked Jenny at Sub and Savers, and they both said yes. So.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a really beautiful design to put in there too. It's
Yeah,
really
it was.
strong.
It was fun to follow along too. It was, for me, it was like I get to be behind the scenes and see the story, and then I get to tell a story as well.
Right.
For those who don't know, the case study of the book is a site called subandsavers.com. It's really a random story. My wife's really into deal hunting and
That's right.
and grocery deals, and we actually started, my wife and I, a site about deals at a particular grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And then we found out that one of the sites that we really looked up to a lot that did the same stuff was the site that was here in Columbia, South Carolina.
Right, like right next door.
Right, and so we got to be friends with them before our site got a cease and desist order from the grocery store that we were covering only. So we got to be really good friends with the people that run subandsavers.com, and their site was, honestly, it was pretty hideous, and they knew it.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to redesign it, and so I ended up referring them to Matthew Smith and Square Die. They got along great, and the process went really well, and they came up with a new identity, a new design.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
and
site now.
a whole new website.
Absolutely.
And so I basically just followed that whole process of the first initial contacts,
Right.
the identity stuff that Andrew Ramos did a great job on, and just tell the whole story.
Yeah, it really works
and how
well.
it fits in with each chapter of the book.
That's right. It really works well if you follow along the learning process in the book. The case study follows those along and really reinforces what you're trying to say. Well, if you can, tell me a little bit about what you do at MailChimp and how you get involved with those guys.
My title there is officially, it's User Experience Designer. Most of what I do there is just front-end development on the application. Work with a guy named Aaron Walter, who's a brilliant guy.
Right.
Does some great stuff about emotional interface design.
Absolutely.
With using Freddy and whatnot. So basically just work on the app there.
That's great. And so what's coming next for Jason? What do you see? What's coming next?
MailChimp. I mean, MailChimp is always coming up with new challenges and new ways for us to do cool stuff.
Awesome.
And so that's pretty much where I'm at.
That's awesome. Well, again, SitePoint book, Principles of Beautiful Web Design. It's a great book, and I think you should all check it out. So thank you.
Thanks, Gene.